Hey guys, tonight's story starts with the crunch of gravel underfoot. Except it isn't gravel. It's the roof of something older, something that refuses to stay buried. The air smells like dust and forgotten prayers. A crow watches you from the ruins, with the confidence of someone who's seen this all before. Every gust of wind feels rehearsed, like the world has done this cycle 1,000 times and is just pretending to be surprised. You look down and realize the ground isn't silent. It's breathing. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up under a red dawn that feels borrowed. The stars are wrong, and the ocean is walking inland again. Not rushing walking, casual, like it's early for an appointment but doesn't want to seem overeager. The air tastes faintly metallic, like someone licked a coin and forgot to stop. You sit up in damp sand that was definitely dry a few minutes ago. Your clothes, which you don't remember putting on, are both too heavy and too light, as if designed by a committee that couldn't agree on what weather appropriate means. The village sits crooked on a ridge, watching the seas approach like someone watching a houseguest rearrange furniture. A few people are already knee-deep in mud, hammering planks together without much conviction. One woman keeps dropping nails in the water, muttering that maybe the ocean just wants its share. You join them, because that's what people do. When the world stops behaving, they find a task and pretend it matters. A man with a beard shaped like a broom gives you a nod. You're late, he says, handing you a rope that looks like it's been through too many existential crises. You tie it to a log that's pretending to be a boat. Wasn't invited, you say. He shrugs. No one ever is. The villagers talk about the flood like it's a recurring holiday. No one enjoys, but everyone attends. Last time, they say, the water stopped at the temple steps. The time before that, it took the temple, the goats, and 3 very confused poets. This time, someone claims, the sea is angrier because of the sacrifices. Apparently, goats are out of fashion, and the ocean prefers fruit now. Nobody knows why. You suspect even the sea doesn't. By noon, the horizon looks swollen. The line between sky and water blurs until it's hard to tell who's coming for whom. A boy runs by holding a chicken that screams in a tone of clear disapproval. The baker argues with a fisherman about whether bread will float better if it's blessed. You start wondering if anyone ever tried asking the ocean what it actually wants. Then again, conversation might just encourage it. A wind rolls in smelling of salt, ash, and something faintly floral, like the world is trying to apologize. You glance up. The sun feels closer than usual, and its reflection on the water forms a second sun below it, a quieter twin. You wonder which one's real. The bearded man laughs and says it doesn't matter, that both will burn your skin the same. He's not wrong. Later, someone starts singing. It's not a hymn exactly, but everyone joins in anyway. You hum along, even though you don't know the words. They sound ancient, or maybe just desperate. The rhythm matches the slap of waves against unfinished hulls. You feel the ground shift slightly, as if the earth is holding its breath. The ocean pauses at the pass, edge of the ridge, pretending to think it over. Then it keeps coming. By dusk, half the boats are afloat. The other half are optimistic sculptures. The water reaches the baker's door. He insists he's fine because bread rises. The goat disagrees and climbs onto a roof. Someone starts handing out jars of pickled something, claiming salt preserves not just food but luck. You take one because turning down luck feels rude on a day like this. The sky deepens into a shade of copper that feels like it should be illegal. Birds fly inland, arguing loudly about leadership. The waves reflect the red light, turning every ripple into a moving ember. The heat fades from your skin, replaced by a chill that feels older than the weather. You think of the stars, the ones that were wrong this morning. You look for them now, but they're gone, washed out by the fire-colored dusk, or maybe just embarrassed to be caught watching. Someone laughs again, and you realize it's you. The sound surprises you more than the flood. There's something absurd about it all, how people keep building boats that will probably sink, lighting fires that will probably drown, and singing songs that will probably be forgotten. Yet they keep doing it. You keep doing it. The sea doesn't care, but the act itself feels like defiance, or maybe habit. When the first wave reaches your knees, it's warmer than expected. It presses against your legs like a cat demanding attention. Around you, lanterns float free, drifting toward the horizon like tiny planets escaping orbit. The bearded man calls out something about tides and trust, but his words are swallowed by the surf. You think you catch the meaning anyway. The night folds over you, red fading to black, stars rearranging themselves into constellations that no one's named yet. You hold onto the side of the half-built boat as it shudders and creaks, deciding whether it wants to be a vessel or a memory. The ocean decides for it. You're moving. Before you notice, the ridge vanishes behind you. The world hums with the low, endless rhythm of water claiming what it remembers. And somewhere beneath the surface, ancient stones shift, waiting for the next dawn to forget the rules all over again. You learn floods aren't disasters here. They're recurring guests, the kind that show up uninvited, stay too long, and still get offered soup. The villagers treat them with weary hospitality. They sweep porches, tie up goats, and nod at the tide like it's a relative with boundary issues. The sea doesn't crash or roar. It saunters, murmuring under its breath, the way old storytellers do when no one's listening, but everyone should be. You stand on a low roof, which is technically a dock now, watching the water flirt with a chimney. A man beside you claims the flood has personality. "Last year it took my shed but left the onions," he says. Selective. That one. He hands you a bucket as if this will help. You use it anyway because doing something feels better than admitting you can't. Children float by on the door of a former bakery, waving wooden spoons like royal scepters. Someone yells that the East Side's pig has learned to swim, and half the village cheers. It's unclear if they're happy for the pig or just impressed by anything thriving in this damp absurdity. The priest stands waist deep in the square, sermonizing to fish. They seem unimpressed. You hear that the ocean tells jokes about mountains, says they're too serious, always reaching for the sky and never once offering a wave. The locals repeat these jokes like sacred gossip. A fisherman insists the waves laughed once real laughter, bubbling up like carbonated thunder. You don't know whether to laugh back or apologize on behalf of landlocked creatures everywhere. At night, the village glows softly. Lamps float where streets used to be, tethered by ropes to chimneys, making it look like the stars have come down to check on things. You wade through knee-high water toward what used to be the inn. The innkeeper, balancing on a half-submerged table, offers you stew made mostly of persistence and whatever drifted in that morning. He calls it ocean surprise. You eat it because it's warm and because the alternative is chewing on questions you can't answer. The conversation drifts like everything else. People talk about which animals deserve first class on the ark they'll never build. Cats, someone says firmly. They already act like they own the place. Another disagrees. Ducks. They're unionized. Laughter ripples across the water, catching on lantern light, thin and beautiful. A boy tries to catch rain in a cup, though the sky's too busy remembering how to cry properly. The clouds hang low, swollen with opinions. Somewhere out there, thunder grumbles like a bureaucrat delayed by paperwork. You imagine the storm, reading from an old manual. Flood procedure. Step 7. Forget mercy. The sea continues its slow negotiation with the land. It doesn't seem angry, just thorough. Every few minutes it rearranges the landscape, as though redecorating. A fence drifts by, then a chair, then what might once have been a wedding arch. Each object bobs with surprising dignity, like it knows this isn't personal. You find yourself laughing more than you should. There's something freeing about seeing the world undone so neatly. The cobbler's sign floats past upside down, reading, "Souls repaired," which feels like prophecy. The baker's boy tries to herd ducks using a broom, shouting that they owe rent. The ducks disagree loudly. Later, when the moon rises and everything glimmers silver, the water quiets. You sit on a rooftop, legs dangling in what used to be Main Street. The reflection of the sky ripples with every small movement, as if time itself has developed seasickness. Beside you, the man with the onions hums an old tune, something his grandmother sang during the last flood or the one before that. The melody is calm, circular, the kind that doesn't end so much as loop back on itself. You start to understand why no one here panics. The floods come, the floods go, and life in between is just the long inhale. You think about how the ocean might feel, carrying the memory of every drowned city, every plank, every whispered plea. Maybe it rises not out of anger, but out of habit, returning to check if humanity still insists on living this close. When the tide finally pauses, resting just below the rooftops, the air grows still. Somewhere, a rooster trapped on a barrel announces victory. The villagers cheer weakly, exhausted but undefeated. The sea retreats an inch, maybe out of pity, maybe to gather more stories. You listen to the soft slosh against brick and wood and realize the water isn't destroying anything. It's just editing. You and a goat watch a town drown politely. The roofs slip under one by one, shingles sighing like old men lowering themselves into bathwater. The goat, unimpressed, chews on a patch of grass that's already half committed to floating away. You both stand on what locals now call the last hill, though technically it's more of an elevated shrug. Below, people wade chest-deep through what used to be streets. Moving furniture like that might convince the water to behave. A man with rolled-up sleeves and misplaced confidence announces that he can negotiate with the flood. "You just have to be firm," he says, as though the sea respects deadlines. He wades forward, hands raised like he's hailing a taxi, and begins speaking to the waves in the slow, clear tone reserved for confused dogs and minor gods. The water answers by swallowing his hat. He takes this as a sign of progress. The goat snorts, which feels like commentary. You're not sure what it knows, but it definitely knows something. It keeps watching the horizon as if waiting for a punchline. The sky above is the color of diluted clay, bruised around the edges. Every now and then lightning flickers somewhere far off, silent and theatrical. The air smells of wet iron and something old trying to remember its name. The villagers have started naming the smaller ponds that form between rooftops. There's Lake Kitchen, Puddle of Regret, and your favorite, the Gulf of Who Left the Door Open. A boy paddles by in a barrel, waving cheerfully like he's on a holiday cruise. His mother yells that dinner's canceled again. He shrugs. Dinner's been canceled every night this week. A woman in a blue shawl sets candles afloat, muttering blessings or possibly complaints. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. The flames drift like lazy stars, bumping into one another before flickering out. You think they look like thoughts trying to stay alive in a damp mind. Someone plays a flute from a rooftop, the tune wobbling between melancholy and indifference. The goat perks its ears, then goes back to chewing. The man negotiating with the water has now upgraded to a formal speech. He promises compromise, mutual benefit, long-term cooperation. The water sends him a plank to lean on, then raises the level another inch. He takes this as encouragement. You admire his optimism, even as you notice his trousers starting to float. Some people just don't understand metaphors until they're knee-deep in them. The wind changes direction, carrying the smell of something sweet and ruined fruit trees, maybe, or a bakery trying not to exist. You imagine the loaves drifting out of the oven mid-rise, confused but dutiful, A dog barks from somewhere distant, the sound warped by distance and echo, like memory playing underwater. You glance at the goat again. It stares back with the calm judgment of an ancient accountant tallying sins by the bucketful. You try to explain that this isn't your fault, that you were just here to watch. The goat flicks its ear, unimpressed. You both know, spectatorship is still a form of participation. By afternoon, the town's clock tower becomes an island. Its bell rings once, a hollow, watery note that sounds less like time and more like surrender. The man with the speeches finally retreats, declaring that the water's being unreasonable. He trudges back up the hill, soggy but undefeated, announcing he'll try again tomorrow with better arguments. The goat sneezes. You take that as applause. The sun appears briefly, a pale coin slipping between clouds. Its reflection trembles across the flood like laughter too tired to commit. The villagers gather what they can, blankets, jars, stories, and climb toward your hill. Some of them wave as if greeting old friends. Others just stare at the horizon like it owes them an explanation. You sit beside the goat, who has decided you're at least tolerable company. Together you watch as the rooftops disappear completely, leaving only the tallest trees and the sound of the world exhaling. Somewhere beneath that wide, indifferent water, the streets still remember the echo of footsteps, the smell of bread, the hum of conversations that once made sense. The wind quiets. The last ripple fades. And for a moment, the world seems to hold its breath, waiting for anyone to tell it what comes next. The goat chews thoughtfully, then looks at you. You realize it already knows. The sky doesn't burn all at once. It starts like gossip, one spark, then another, until the entire horizon decides subtlety is overrated. Streaks of light cross overhead, too many to count, too bright to wish upon. The sound arrives late, a low growl that feels less like thunder and more like the planet remembering something unpleasant. You stand in the middle of the street, shoes melting slightly, wondering if this counts as weather. People around you react in predictable ways. Some pray, some cheer, some take notes. One man sets up a stall labeled Comet Cookery and begins roasting. Fish on the glowing asphalt. Innovation, he declares proudly, fanning the flames with a piece of cardboard that used to be a resume. The fish smell wonderful, assuming you ignore the faint undertone of apocalypse. Someone else toasts bread on a manhole cover and insists it's artisanal. The buildings aren't catching fire so much as rethinking their composition. Glass ripples like syrup, bricks sag into polite puddles, and iron beams twist themselves into new philosophies. You watch a cathedral collapse inward with the grace of a bowing performer. The crowd applauds. The goat from earlier, because of course it survived, stands on a smoking car, chewing a hymn book like it's salad. The heat moves strangely here. It doesn't rush at you. It lingers, thoughtful, like it wants to see how you'll react. Every breath tastes like copper and candle smoke. Someone beside you claims the fire is divine judgment. Someone else says it's cosmic recycling. You're not sure which theory makes you feel better. A woman in a red scarf laughs as a meteor lands 2 streets away, spraying molten debris in polite arcs. "At least it's warm," she says, holding her hands out like she's by a fireplace. The ground trembles gently, like the world's stomach growling. A few children start dancing in the sparks, treating the chaos as an impromptu festival. Someone starts drumming on a barrel, and just like that, the end of the world has rhythm. You wander through what's left of the market. Every object glows faintly, pretending to be alive. A clock has melted into a spiral, its hands still twitching toward midnight. Pots bubble on their own heat, cooking whatever hope was left unattended. The scent of burnt paper drifts through the air. Letters, books, contracts, centuries of human insistence curling into smoke. And yet, amid the ruin, someone keeps writing. You catch sight of a poet crouched by a fountain that's now a crater, scribbling on a slate. "It's not destruction," he mutters. "It's punctuation." You can't argue with that. The sky opens wider, revealing streaks of violet flame that shouldn't exist. Each one carves a new line across the clouds, a reminder that beauty doesn't ask permission. The light is almost too much to look at, but everyone keeps watching anyway. A man points upward, laughing. "See? Free fireworks?" His hat immediately catches fire. He doesn't notice for a while. The goat wanders closer, unbothered, eyes reflecting twin suns. You wonder if it remembers the floods, the water that argued and won. Maybe this is its sequel, the opposite element having its turn. You sit beside it on a still warm curb. Together you watch a row of lampposts melt into silver reeds. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings again, though there's no tower left to house it. Someone shouts that the stars are falling. Someone else corrects them, says they're rising, escaping. You can't tell the difference. The horizon blurs into a glowing smear, and for a moment it feels like the whole world has been placed inside a furnace just hot enough to think. People cheer, cry, kiss, faint, philosophize, and keep eating fish. You almost admire the commitment. When the last streak fades and darkness limps back in, the air feels heavier, quieter, expectant. The city, or what remains of it, smolders in shades of orange and blue, a strange kind of peace settling over the ruin. The goat curls up beside you, sighing like an old librarian closing a book. You look up at the sky, clear now, indifferent, and think that maybe the fire wasn't punishment after all. Maybe it was just the universe's way of editing, striking through everything unnecessary, leaving behind only the parts that still glow. The day begins with light behaving strangely, not brighter, exactly, just more personal, as if the sun has decided to focus on you specifically. The air hums like a broken wire, and every metal object seems to be gossiping. You squint upward and see the clouds shimmer green and violet, like silk being shaken out across the sky. Someone says it's beautiful. Someone else says it's an omen. You say nothing because you're busy watching the compass in your hand spin like it's auditioning for dizziness. The storm comes in silence. No thunder, no wind, just a pulse that passes through everything at once. Birds forget where north is and start holding emergency meetings on rooftops. Watches stop mid-tick. A group of miners emerges from their tunnel arguing about whether it's morning or Tuesday. You watch a man try to start his car until the engine gives up and starts praying instead. You wander through a town that smells faintly of ozone and confusion. The telegraph wires hum, each one vibrating in sympathy with something unseen. A woman selling oranges insists her fruit now glows faintly at night, for aesthetic reasons. You buy one, mostly for research, and discover she's right. It pulses in your hand like a tiny heartbeat. Then you meet the priest. He's standing in front of his church, staring at the sky with the kind of expression usually reserved for freshly baked miracles. The building behind him is empty. His congregation has wandered outside to worship the aurora instead. He smiles at you without turning around. "They've gone where the color is," he says, as if that explains everything. You ask if he's angry. "Angry?" He laughs. "No, the light's doing a better job than I ever did." He raises his hands toward the sky and blesses the glowing clouds like an artist signing someone else's masterpiece. The streets fill with people holding anything that might serve as a mirror. Bowls, coins, spoons. One woman holds up a puddle in her hands and insists she can see angels swimming in it. The air itself feels charged, each breath crisp and slightly metallic, like tasting electricity through glass. A boy tries to fry an egg on a rock. It cooks instantly. He calls it divine proof of breakfast. You notice the animals behaving oddly. Dogs stare skyward, tails wagging at invisible music. Cows arrange themselves in circles, facing east, as if attending a seminar. Even the goat reappears, perched on a fence post, watching the sky with the solemn patience of someone who's already seen how this ends. You sit beside it and both of you look up. The colors shift faster now, threads of light weaving through one another like arguments between gods. The priest walks by again, robes glowing faintly as static clings to him. The sun sneezed, he says cheerfully. Even stars have allergies. He hands you a candle that won't light and claims it doesn't need to anymore. You hold it anyway because it feels like something worth holding. The aurora moves overhead, pulsing like breath. For a moment, everyone falls quiet. The world hums, just one long note, deep and resonant, like the planet clearing its throat. You can feel it in your ribs, in the soles of your feet, in the air between thoughts. And then, as suddenly as it began, the sound fades. The light dissolves into the sky like spilled ink absorbed by paper. The town stands still. No engines, no clocks, no arguments, just silence, warm and golden. The priest sighs and says he'll have to learn sermons from scratch now. The goat sneezes, which feels like an answer. Somewhere behind you, someone starts clapping, softly at first, then louder. The others join in, applauding the invisible performer that just exited the stage. You look up one last time. The sun seems closer, somehow still glowing, but tired, like an artist proud of a messy painting. You think about how fragile everything is, and how beautiful that fragility looks when it's illuminated. The compass in your pocket twitches once more, points at nothing in particular, and stops trying. The day exhales, the sky returns to blue, and somewhere in the quiet distance, the world starts remembering which way is forward again. You arrive at the edge of a city that seems to be halfway through remembering itself. The streets are patient, paved with stone that has clearly seen this all before. Walls rise and collapse in layers. Old limestone, newer brick, older limestone. Again, each generation stacked on top of the last, like no one could admit they weren't starting fresh. The air smells of dust and déjà vu. You can almost hear the city clearing its throat, trying to decide which century to pretend it's from. A man with a chisel tells you the foundations whisper at night. He swears they gossip about the architects, mocking them for their confidence, laughing about how every blueprint eventually becomes archaeology. You lean against a half-toppled column, and it feels warm, as if it's still digesting the memory of fire. Somewhere beneath your feet, another city sleeps, and beneath that, another still. You imagine the earth as a forgetful landlord, constantly renovating the same apartment. You wander through a square that looks almost intact until you notice every statue is missing its face. Blank marble heads tilt toward the sun, as though trying to remember the expressions they used to wear. A bird nests in the eye socket of a forgotten emperor. The wind picks up, carrying the faint metallic scent of rusted crowns and misplaced pride. You look up and see a faint shimmer in the air, a mirage of towers that no longer exist, projected by the heat like a memory refusing to fade. People live here still, though you're not sure why. They build houses inside the ruins of older houses, careful to leave the old doors in place, even if they lead to walls. A baker's shop occupies what was once a temple. He says the ovens were already there, waiting. His bread tastes faintly of incense and dust. He laughs when you mention it and says the gods must still be hungry. You find an old map etched into a slab of stone, the lines crossing, over one another like an argument. It labels districts that don't exist anymore. The Garden of Spears, the Quarter of the Moon, the Road of Promises. A boy selling trinkets tells you those names come and go every few centuries. The city changes its mind a lot, he says, tossing a coin carved with two different calendars. It can't decide whether to remember or move on. The ruins hum at night. You feel it through the soles of your feet, a low vibration that might be wind, might be memory. The walls seem to breathe, inhaling the dark, exhaling dust. You sit near an old fountain that now spits sand instead of water. The goat appears again, as if on assignment, and stares at you with the indifference of an immortal accountant. You tell it you're starting to understand the world doesn't erase, it just layers. The goat blinks, unimpressed, and starts eating a piece of parchment that might have been a deed to the city once. In the distance, lightning flashes, revealing the outlines of forgotten towers beneath the earth, visible for just a heartbeat. The stones glisten. old names carved into their sides, glowing faintly before the dark swallows them again. You wonder who carved them, who thought their letters would last. You realize they did, just not in the way anyone expected. As night deepens, the ruins grow louder. Stones creak as they settle. Dust drifts like slow snowfall. And somewhere beneath the noise, a low murmur rises. It sounds like voices arguing over the details of a story no one remembers correctly. You catch fragments, something about kings, something about collapse, something about how it all looked better the first time. The air shivers. The city exhales. By morning, half the structures you saw yesterday are gone, replaced by new walls rising from the same old foundations. The people move around them without comment, as if rebuilding is just another kind of breathing. The baker waves as you pass and tells you not to worry. The city always looks like this mid-dream. You nod, because it makes sense in the way that tired wisdom always does. You take one last look before leaving, and swear you see the stones tilt toward each other, whispering again, already rewriting the story of themselves. The cave greets you with a draft that smells faintly of rust and bad memory. The air hums in a way that feels deliberate, like something inside the rock is thinking. You walk deeper, your footsteps echoing in a rhythm that doesn't quite belong to you, and there it is, a machine. Not one machine, really, but a congregation of them, half buried in limestone, gears still turning even though time should have fired them centuries ago. The light from your lantern catches on copper teeth and steel veins, glinting like the grin of something that knows it shouldn't exist but refuses to stop. You crouch beside a set of gears the size of wagon wheels. They move with the soft confidence of a heartbeat, unhurried and entirely unconcerned with your understanding. You reach out to touch one and feel warmth. Not the warmth of friction, but something alive, pulsing faintly under your fingertips. The sound they make isn't mechanical, it's language. Rhythmic, careful, almost conversational. You swear the gears are speaking Latin. There's a scholar nearby, sitting cross-legged on a slab of rock, arguing with a corroded battery the size of a loaf of bread. He insists it's impossible, that no one in that age could have made it. The battery hums in response, a low, smug tone that somehow manages to sound like disagreement. You see, he says, throwing his hands up. Mockery. It's mocking me. He jots notes furiously into a damp notebook as the battery emits a short, defiant spark, as if signing its name. The walls of the cave shimmer faintly, with lines carved in symbols you half recognize, mathematics mixed with prayer. Formulas braided with confessions. You trace a finger along one, and prayer, feel a vibration, a voice under the stone whispering something about the weight of memory. The scholar claims these inscriptions describe planetary movements, but they also list the ingredients for bread. They multitasked, he explains. Genius, really. You're not sure if he means the ancients or the walls themselves. Further in, you find a structure resembling an altar, but filled with levers and cogs. Every few seconds, it sighs and resets itself, like an exhausted clerk doomed to file the same paperwork forever. You push a lever experimentally, and the machine responds by projecting a faint image into the air, a map of constellations that don't exist anymore. Stars arranged like letters, words that could mean home or warning or oops. The scholar peers over your shoulder, fascinated. It's preposterous, he murmurs. Beautifully preposterous. The machines continue their quiet labor, synchronized like monks chanting under their breath. Dust drifts through the lantern light, glittering like slow snow. Somewhere deeper, you hear a metallic click, then a chime that sounds suspiciously like laughter. You ask the scholar what it is. He frowns. I think it's learning our accents. You both sit in silence for a while, watching the gears turn. There's something peaceful about it. In the same way that watching a storm from a safe distance feels peaceful, you know it could notice you at any time. The scholar starts to hum absent-mindedly, and to your surprise, the nearest machine joins in, its rhythm matching his tune almost perfectly. He stops, alarmed. The machine doesn't. You leave him there, still debating with his ancient adversary. The battery glows faintly in the dark, responding to each of his accusations with dignified static. Outside, the night air feels colder, as if the stars themselves are running on borrowed charge. You glance back once more. Deep in the cave, the gears keep turning, their metallic murmur echoing like prayer or code or laughter from a century that refuses to stay dead. You visit a desert made of fused sand, a place where sunlight and history once had a disagreement and neither backed down. The ground stretches out like a sheet of amber glass, rippling faintly as if the heat still remembers the argument. It crunches under your boots, but doesn't break it, just sighs, a brittle sound that feels too aware of you. Someone nearby insists it's art, that nature simply took a bold modernist turn. Someone else insists it's evidence, though of what depends on who's telling the story. You crouch to touch the surface. It's smooth in some places, sharp in others, like the earth tried to sculpt itself and gave up halfway. Beneath the thin crust of wind-blown dust, you can see bubbles frozen mid-burst, tiny pockets of air trapped since the day the sand decided to melt. They look like punctuation marks, an unfinished sentence written by catastrophe. You wonder what language the ground was speaking when it forgot how to be soil. A guide appears, the kind of person who wears too many scarves for this much heat, and announces that you're standing on the world's oldest glasswork installation. He gestures proudly toward a ridge of shimmering dunes. Spontaneous, large-scale collaboration between geology and thermodynamics. You ask if that's a polite way of saying explosion. He laughs and says, "Aren't all great things?" A few tourists wander by, each with their own version of awe. One man squints through a camera lens, narrating like he's filming for a documentary no one asked for. A woman kneels to place her ear against the glass, claiming she can hear voices. Whispers, she says, like names being spoken under the sand. The guide frowns and reminds her sound doesn't travel through glass that way. She ignores him and keeps listening. The air wavers, far off. Mirages flicker what look like buildings, towers maybe, shimmering, just enough to feel possible. You blink and they vanish, leaving only the emptiness of melted memory. A scientist nearby sets down instruments that beep softly, trying to take the desert's temperature. "It's still cooling," she says, voice hushed, "after 12,000 years." She doesn't look up when she says it, as if afraid of waking something. You walk further out, past a sign warning not to dig. The ground here is translucent enough to see faint shadows beneath it, shapes that might be roots or relics or something less comfortable. The sunlight burns so bright that the reflections overlap, turning the horizon into a blurred line between real and remembered. You stop, thinking you hear something beneath your feet, a faint hum, almost a sigh, almost words. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe the woman was right. Maybe the glass does know names. A boy sells small chunks of the desert from a folding table. Each piece catches the light differently, green, gold, smoky gray. He claims some glow at night. "Tourist glass," the guide mutters, shaking his head. The real stuff hums. You buy one anyway, because you can't tell the difference, and because holding a fragment of apocalypse feels strangely grounding. When the sun begins to set, the desert glows from within. The glass catches the dying light and throws it back at the sky, scattering color in ways paint could never manage. Everyone falls quiet. The guide removes his hat. The scientist closes her notebook. Even the wind pauses, as though the world is waiting for the desert to finish saying something it's been holding in for millennia. You stand there until the stars appear, their reflections trembling across the ground like distant fires. The surface beneath you cools just enough to stop whispering, but you can still feel the echo of whatever happened here. Heat that turned earth into mirror, memory into mineral. Someone behind you sighs, saying again that it's art. Someone else whispers that it's evidence. You realize it can be both. The glass doesn't care what it's called. It remembers everything the same way by refusing to forget. You meet the sailor in a harbor that smells of salt, smoke, and arguments that have lasted generations. His coat is patched with places he claims to have been, though you suspect half the stitching is fiction. He waves a rolled map like it's proof of survival or madness, possibly both. Copied from the ice, he says, eyes bright as the sea before a storm. Oldest map in the world. Drew itself, more or less. He spreads it across a crate, and you see shapes that don't belong to any geography you recognize. Continents stretch and fold, like they're remembering how they used to fit together. The lines are drawn in ink the color of bruises. Mountains coil where oceans should be. Rivers cross deserts that don't exist anymore. You trace a coastline that flickers when touched, shimmering with trapped sunlight. The sailor grins. Told you it was alive, he says, and taps the parchment. It hums faintly, as if annoyed. The ice made it, back before it forgot it could melt. You ask what he means, and he launches into a story about explorers who found carvings beneath glaciers, maps etched into the frozen walls themselves. They melted what they could, traced what remained, and the result was this, a record drawn not by hands, but by memory itself. Ice remembers everything, he mutters, where the land used to sleep, where the water once went wandering, even who walked across it before we thought to call it ours. Around you, the harbor bustles. Fishermen shout about prices. Gulls steal from unattended nets. Someone is singing about lost love and bad navigation. But the map holds your attention like gravity. You notice small symbols tucked between the familiar landmasses, spirals, eyes, patterns that look like storms frozen mid-turn. The sailor explains they mark the old faults, the places where continents once shook hands and drifted apart in slow, catastrophic friendship. They'll come together again, he adds casually. They always do. Earth's sentimental that way. He rolls the map up carefully, then changes the subject, asking if you've ever heard of cities that appear on maps before they're built. You tell him you've heard of mistakes. He insists mistakes don't hum when you look at them. The parchment trembles slightly, as if agreeing. She doesn't like to be called wrong, he says, nodding at it like it's an old friend with delicate feelings. Later, when the tide rises, you follow him to a cliff overlooking the bay. The wind there tastes metallic, the kind that makes compasses spin and ships reconsider their plans. He unrolls the map again, pinning the corners with stones. The coastline below matches the drawing exactly, though you swear some of the islands weren't there yesterday. It shifts, he says, updates itself, like it's remembering out loud. The sun dips lower, painting the water gold. For a moment, you can see faint shapes beneath the surface, outlines of mountains, roads, entire continents ghosting through the waves. The sailor watches quietly, face caught between wonder and grief. We think we build history, he says, but the land just rewrites it when we're not looking. You sit beside him until the light fades, the map glowing faintly in the dark. The paper feels cool under your hand, as though a pulse runs through it, slow and deliberate. The sailor hums an old sea tune that sounds like coordinates sung backward. You look at the map one last time, at the shifting borders and faintly breathing ink, and realize it isn't showing where things are, it's showing where they've been and where they're going again. When you leave, the map is still open, catching the moonlight like water. The continents ripple once more, stretching, sighing, adjusting themselves into the memory of the world they used to be. You run your fingers along a wall carved so precisely it offends modern tools. The stone fits against stone like it was poured, not built, every joint too perfect to be honest. Light crawls over the surface, as if the rock itself is showing off, the way old artists do when they know no one alive can match them. Somewhere nearby, a hammer gives up drops from a frustrated archaeologist's hand and clatters against the floor, defeated by geometry. The air in the chamber feels thick with stubbornness. You can taste the dust of arguments that have lasted centuries. Scholars, engineers, mystics, all equally baffled by how something so ancient refuses to make sense. You kneel and run your palm along one of the fitted blocks, tracing a seam so fine it might as well be a scar. The stone feels warm, not sun-warmed, but body-warm, as if the mountain it came from still remembers having blood. A guide, tired and underpaid, tells you the site predates everything it's compared to. He points at the polished surfaces and shrugs. They say it was once soft, he mutters, like clay that decided to be immortal. He laughs without conviction and kicks a pebble that bounces away like it knows better than to linger. Around you, tourists shuffle and whisper, snapping pictures that will later look disappointingly normal. A child presses her ear against the wall and insists she hears breathing. Her mother pulls her away, embarrassed. But you listen too, and, for a moment, you think the girl might be right. The stone exhales quietly, like a sleeper turning over in a very long dream. Farther inside, you find tools left behind from past excavations, chisels, drills, saws, all dulled into irrelevance. A plaque nearby claims the builders worked with copper, which makes everyone laugh. A woman in a wide hat suggests sound might have been the real tool, vibrations coaxing the rock into obedience. Her companion dismisses it. Sound doesn't cut granite, she smiles. Neither does copper. The silence that follows is the kind you can trip over. You wander away from the group until you're alone in a narrow passage. The light fades behind you, swallowed by walls that almost shimmer. You reach out again, half expecting your hand to sink into the stone like water. It doesn't. But the surface feels strange, pliable beneath its cool skin, as though the stone is deciding whether to stay solid. You whisper something meaningless, a test maybe, and the echo comes back slower, softer, like the wall is thinking about what you said. When you step into the main chamber again, the others are gathered around a block the size of a cottage. Someone set up a laser to measure how level it is, and the result annoys everyone. Perfect, down to a fraction too small to admit out loud. The engineer shakes his head, muttering about lost methods and impossible tolerances. Even if we could do it, he says, we wouldn't. The hammer lies on the floor beside him, sulking. You sit on a fallen column and watch the last light of the afternoon slide down the walls, pooling in the grooves carved like flowing fabric. It's hard to tell if they're decorative or if the stone itself melted once and froze mid-motion. The guide lights a cigarette and says the locals believe the stones remember being alive. They just pretend now, he adds, exhaling smoke that curls toward the ceiling, because it's easier than explaining. As you leave, the air shifts behind you. A low hum ripples through the chamber, faint but steady, like someone dragging a finger along the rim of a crystal bowl. The tourists don't notice, but the guide glances back, uneasy. Outside, the mountains stretch against the horizon, their silhouettes softened by dusk. You look at the peaks and can't shake the thought that they're still waiting, still cooling, still listening. The hammer remains inside, forgotten. Somewhere deep within the walls, the stone turns that small sound over and over, remembering what it felt like to be soft. You arrive at the temple just as the morning heat begins to shimmer, blurring the horizon like an indecisive dream. The walls rise from the dust in shades of honey and bone, carved so sharply they look recent, though the locals say they've stood since God still answered mail. You expect the usual ruins, weathered stone, cautious reverence, but what you find instead are screw holes, perfectly round, evenly spaced, lined up in rows like the gods' once installed shelving units. The archaeologists pace in circles, muttering about tools that shouldn't exist and civilizations that clearly didn't follow the rules. Inside, the air is cooler, thick with the smell of incense and academic panic. Statues stand along the corridor, their faces serene, their poses eternal, and yet you swear one of them is wearing something that looks suspiciously like sunglasses. Not carved lenses or ornamentation, but smooth, shaded stone across the eyes, seamless with the face. A graduate student crouches with a notebook, whispering measurements as if afraid the statue might eavesdrop. "It's optical," she says, voice trembling between wonder and horror. "They had optics." Her supervisor corrects her. "They had imagination." Neither sounds convinced. You trail behind a group of locals who've come to pray. They move with the easy familiarity of people visiting an old friend who still refuses to explain their secrets. One old woman pats the wall as she passes, murmuring something that might be thanks or gossip. You watch her slip a coin into a small niche beside a stone tablet etched with spiral grooves. The coin vanishes before it hits bottom. The archaeologists pretend not to see it. A man in a wide hat points toward the ceiling, where the carvings twist into shapes that could be constellations or schematics. Ventilation system, he insists. Primitive air conditioning. Another scoffs. You think they had ductwork? The first man gestures toward the open skylight, where sunlight funnels down like a spotlight and hits a polished slab in the center of the room. The slab hums faintly. Tell me that's decoration, he says. No one does. Someone discovers a set of copper rods embedded in the floor, green with age but unmistakably deliberate. They hum too, faintly, when touched. The sound is low and patient, like something enormous breathing behind a wall. The archaeologists grow very quiet. The locals, however, start to sing. Their voices fill the chamber with a melody so old it feels untranslatable, rising and falling in rhythm with the soft vibration underfoot. For a moment, the light bends just slightly, and every surface glows as if remembering how. Outside, the wind picks up, carrying dust across the courtyard, where more statues wait. You notice one holding what looks like a tablet, not the stone kind, but flat, rectangular, polished, smooth. Its surface catches the sunlight and throws it back in a perfect beam that lands on another figure across the square. The second statue glows briefly, as though acknowledging the signal. A researcher drops his clipboard and swears softly. Reflective communication, he whispers. They were talking to each other. By midday, the site feels restless. Measuring tapes twist themselves, cameras short out, and one unfortunate intern faints near the altar, insisting the floor whispered her name. The locals don't flinch. They light candles and leave fruit offerings, murmuring that the gods have always been forgetful with their belongings. They'll come for their tools eventually, the old woman says, fanning herself. They always do. You step back through the temple gate as the sun leans west, the air crackling faintly behind you. From outside, the structure looks ordinary again, just weathered stone, patient and silent. But you can still hear it, a faint hum beneath the ground, like metal remembering motion. The archaeologists argue about data and probability. The locals pack up their offerings, and high above, a lone statue catches the last light of the day on its darkened lenses, staring toward the horizon as if waiting for someone to return and finish what they started. You meet the scientist halfway up the trail, hunched under a backpack full of instruments that blink and beep like nervous pets. Her hair is plastered to her forehead, her eyes too bright for the altitude. She greets you with the enthusiasm of someone who hasn't spoken to a person in days and immediately informs you that the mountain is alive. You assume she means metaphorically, but she doesn't blink when she says it, and the mountain behind her hums in a way that makes metaphor seem lazy. The path twists through scree and moss, each step crunching like brittle paper. You keep waiting for the mountain to do something mountain-like, rumble, shed a pebble, look majestic, but instead it feels watchful, not menacing exactly, just aware, the way an old cat watches you rearrange its furniture. The scientist leads you toward a cluster of sensors stuck into the soil like needles, their wires trailing off into a small tent full of buzzing machines. She flips a switch, and a low vibration fills the air, deep enough to rattle your ribs. Heartbeat, she says, grinning like she's introducing a friend. The monitor flickers with slow, deliberate pulses. It's not tectonic. It's too regular, too patient. You ask if she's sure it's not wind, or magma, or her own stomach growling. She smirks. Mountains don't get hungry. They get nostalgic. You both sit on a rock that's probably older than fire. The ground is warm, though the air is cold enough to sting. She tells you the mountain used to be worshipped. back before the locals decided it was safer to ignore things that breathed without lungs. They built shrines all along the ridges, she says, gesturing toward faint stone outlines, half buried in lichen. Then one day, they stopped climbing. You ask why? She points to the slope above. Because sometimes it answers. You laugh, but she doesn't. The wind quiets, the machines keep humming, and then the mountain sighs. It's not loud, more like the sound of snow settling or an orchestra tuning in slow motion, but it moves through everything. Dust rises from the ground, birds explode from trees below, and the air tastes of minerals and old secrets. You forget to breathe. The scientist clutches her notepad like it's a life vest. When it fades, you expect someone to make a joke, to pop the tension like a blister. Instead, there's silence, thick and respectful. You realize you've been holding your hands flat against the rock, and it's pulsing faintly, like a drumbeat far underground. The scientist whispers something into a recorder, but her voice shakes. Subject emitted vocalization, she says, though the words sound small compared to what just happened. She starts talking faster, pacing, listing data points that sound increasingly desperate. Frequency ranges, vibration depths, chemical traces in the air. The machines beep nervously, as if aware they're out of their depth. You tune her out and stare up at the ridgeline, where the last bit of sunlight catches on the summit. For a moment, you could swear it shifts slightly, almost like a head tilting. You ask what happens next. She shrugs, exhausted. I think it's trying to remember something, she says, or maybe it's waiting for someone to remember it. She glances at the slope as though expecting an answer. The mountain stays quiet, inscrutable, smug in its silence. As night falls, you help her pack up the instruments. The ground seems softer now, more elastic under your boots, like you're walking on the back of something sleeping, lightly. The stars appear one by one, reflected faintly on the metal of her equipment. When you turn to leave, a low sound rolls through the valley again, quieter this time, almost a chuckle. The scientist looks at you with wide eyes. That, she says, was new. You both stand there a while, listening to the slow breathing of stone, the air trembling with the sound of age. Somewhere deep inside the mountain, something shifts again, settling into dreams you're not invited to understand. You start down the trail, the earth still warm beneath your feet, and every few steps, you swear it inhales. You wake to the smell of smoke and something that might once have been bread. The horizon is gray but alive, stitched with the thin threads of campfire trails. 10,000 people left, give or take whoever wandered off during the night. Civilization fits comfortably now inside a single valley, and even then, they're still arguing about who gets the cleanest corner. You stretch beside a fire that's more ash than flame. Someone is burning toast, which feels like a luxury of error. It's breakfast, the cook says defensively, scraping at blackened crumbs with a stick. The smell drifts through camp, thick and nostalgic. A few people close their eyes like it's incense. You realize this might be how mythology starts, not with thunderbolts or miracles, but with someone accidentally setting breakfast on fire and everyone deciding it means something. The tents hum quietly in the wind. Children draw shapes in the dirt that might one day be letters again. A woman with a cracked mug announces she's taking attendance, as if counting will make the number less impossible. People answer with names that sound older than they should, syllables rescued from 1,000 dead languages. There's talk of rebuilding a library, which currently consists of 3 paperbacks and a manual for a washing machine no one can power. The washing machine itself sits nearby, filled with rainwater and fish, a symbol of unintended adaptation. Someone starts carving words into bark. It looks ceremonial, but it's just inventory: who's got salt, who's got fire-starting gel, who can still sing without crying halfway through. A man with a voice like gravel volunteers to be the new historian. It's easy, he says. Just write everything down before we forget again. His pen leaks halfway through his first sentence, and the ink runs like it's laughing. By midday, the camp buzzes with purpose. A group of engineers argue about whether a solar panel can be coaxed back to life. The consensus is maybe, if it feels appreciated. Another team attempts to fix a radio, though no one expects an answer. When static crackles through the speaker, people stop what they're doing, listening as if the sound itself is holy. The scientist beside you whispers that noise is the universe remembering how to talk. You wander to the river. It's muddy, but loyal, winding through the valley like it's always known where to go. Someone's built a crude water wheel from the skeleton of a bicycle. It turns lazily, squeaking out the rhythm of a world relearning how to move. Children toss pebbles in and pretend their ship's bound for somewhere else. The idea of elsewhere feels exotic now. That night, the fires multiply, flickering like constellations that forgot to rise. People gather close, the way stories require. The historian clears his throat and begins to tell the tale of the toast. He adds details that didn't happen: divine sparks, heavenly smoke, a message written in crumbs. Laughter ripples through the crowd, but no one stops him. Myths, it turns out, are just truths that have been left near the fire too long. When the laughter fades, someone starts humming. The melody spreads, fragile but persistent, carried on the wind between tents and half-broken walls. You find yourself joining in before realizing you know the tune. It's something old, something that belonged to the world when it was bigger. For a moment, the valley hums like a living thing, voices overlapping, weaving a kind of courage that doesn't require understanding. The fire pops. The stars above seem closer, like they've crouched down to listen. You think about how humanity used to fill continents, now reduced to a handful of names and sparks. But there's warmth here, and noise, and the steady rhythm of people still pretending tomorrow exists. Somewhere behind you, someone drops another slice of bread into the flames. Nobody complains. The smell of burnt toast drifts upward, curling into the night, the first prayer of a smaller world. You find her sitting on a flat stone at the edge of the village, tracing lines in the dust with a stick. The evening sky hasn't darkened yet, but she's already drawing stars, little dots, careful connections. The kind of patience only children and astronomers have. You watch from a few paces away, thinking it's just play, until you realize the pattern isn't random. The girl hums under her breath, pauses, and adds another mark exactly where the first thin light appears overhead. Someone nearby mutters that she's been doing this for weeks, and every night the sky obeys. She'll draw a cluster no one has ever named, and then, as if embarrassed, the stars will blink into the same pattern hours later. Coincidence, says the teacher. Magic, says the farmer. The girl doesn't answer either. She just keeps drawing. When you ask her where she learned the shapes, she shrugs. From before, she says. And you realize that's not an explanation but a timeline. You kneel beside her. The constellations don't match any chart you've seen. Some look like familiar ones rearranged by an impatient god. Others are entirely foreign. She connects two stars and whispers something that sounds less like a word and more like an instruction. The wind stirs. The nearest campfire flickers as though agreeing. The villagers have started to treat her drawings as predictions. Yesterday she sketched a spiral of dots, and that night an aurora circled the horizon like a crown. A man from the hills brought her old star maps to test her memory, but she just laughed. "They're missing the ones that went to sleep," she said. "I'm trying to wake them up." Her stick scratched faster, more certain, as if the earth beneath her hand remembered too. At dusk, she draws again, this time using charcoal on a slab of limestone. You notice her proportions are exact. The distances, the angles, the alignment to the horizon. It's geometry, not guesswork. You mention this to her mother, who looks tired. "She doesn't know numbers," the woman says quietly. "Not yet." She looks at her daughter the way people look at storms they hope will pass gently. The sky deepens into velvet, and the stars begin their slow bloom. The ones she's drawn appear first, low and sharp, like new thoughts. People gather without being told to. Someone sets down bread. Another lights incense. The air feels charged, but calm like a memory rehearsed too many times. When she finishes her final line, she stands, drops the stick, and points upward. "There," she says, and there they are. You've seen meteor showers, eclipses, even the faint ribbon of galaxies on clear nights. But this feels different. The constellations above you aren't twinkling, they're steady, deliberate, watching. The girl smiles as if they've finally listened. The stars shimmer once, faintly tinged with rose, as if blushing under attention. The teacher tries to name the shapes, fumbling with old mythic terms, but the girl corrects him softly. Her names are simple: ladder, breath, echo, door. Words that feel like they belong to a time before language became heavy. She yawns halfway through explaining and curls up beside her limestone chart as though she's just finished some cosmic chore. Within minutes, she's asleep. Later, when everyone drifts back to their tents, you linger. The limestone glows faintly in the dark, the drawings pulsing in time with the stars above. You trace one with your fingertip and feel warmth, faint but alive, spreading through the stone. It's like touching the edge of memory itself. You look back at the girl, dreaming quietly, and it occurs to you that maybe she isn't remembering the past at all. Maybe she's rehearsing what comes next. The stars shift again, subtle as breath, and you swear one of them winks. The night hums softly, content, as if the sky has been waiting 90,000 years for someone small enough to remind it who it used to be. You follow the river at dawn, when the fog still clings to its surface like a second language. It murmurs softly, words tumbling under the current, syllables shaped by the movement of water against stone. At first, you think it's the wind, but then the rhythm changes, measured, structured, undeniably grammatical. You crouch by the bank, listening. The river is conjugating. The sound rises and falls like a recitation, vowels bubbling through silt, consonants caught in eddies. You don't recognize the language, but it feels old, not ancient in the fossil sense, but ancient like muscle memory. You try repeating what you hear, stumbling over sounds that don't belong in a human mouth. The river pauses, as though considering your effort, and corrects you softly but firmly, like a patient teacher. By midday, the valley hums with it. Birds echo fragments of the phrases. The trees rustle in what sounds like punctuation. A linguist from the camp appears beside you, her notebook soaked from the mist. She's been mapping the sounds, claiming the river uses proper grammar, subject, verb, object, with occasional poetic improvisation. "It's not just speaking," she says. "It's remembering how to speak." She dips a microphone into the current, and the water flinches away from it like an insult. "It prefers conversation," you say, and she gives you a look that suggests you're not wrong. Further downstream, children toss pebbles into the water and listen for replies. Each splash gets an answer, a ripple shaped like a word. One child drops a flat stone and hears her name come back in perfect clarity. She runs to her mother, who doesn't ask how that kind of question feels outdated now. The river continues, switching languages midstream, Latin to Sumerian, to something that might not belong to this world at all. You ask the linguist what it's saying. She flips through pages of phonetic scribbles and sighs. "Mostly stories," she says. "Geological gossip. It remembers mountains before they were mountains. It's very proud of having carved valleys." She hesitates before adding, "and it keeps asking where everyone went." The air grows heavier, as though the words themselves have mass. You kneel again and whisper a question into the current. "What are we supposed to do now?" The water ripples, rearranging leaves into symbols before carrying them away. The answer is brief, almost a sigh, something that translates roughly to continue. You don't know if that's permission or instruction. At dusk, the camp gathers by the bank. Fires crackle, casting orange reflections over the surface. The river's voice deepens, flowing in slow, deliberate sentences. It speaks of warmth trapped beneath ice, of continents drifting apart like friends who promise to stay in touch. The linguist writes until her hand cramps. Someone asks if it's dangerous to listen too long. The river laughs, a sound like rain on metal. You try speaking again. this time in your own tongue. The river imitates you, mangling the syntax but nailing the emotion. There's a strange comfort in that, a dialogue, however uneven. You realize it's not just language returning, but memory, crawling back from wherever lost things. Wait. When the stars come out, the river's voice softens. It hums a lullaby in a dialect no one has spoken. For 10,000 generations, you lie back on the bank, half dizzy, half awed. The water runs smooth beside you, whispering fragments of grammar imperatives, subjunctives, the conditional tenses of hope. You understand one thing clearly. It isn't teaching you to speak, it's teaching you to listen. You watch them build. Not one temple, but thousands, scattered across mountains and deserts, each one aimed at the same invisible idea. They carve stone like it's a prayer, line pillars with impossible precision, and then stand back to squint at the stars as if checking their homework. Whole civilizations turn their eyes upward, measuring eternity with strings and shadows. You get the feeling the sky didn't ask for this kind of attention but accepts it anyway, patient as a teacher who's graded this same assignment before. At first, it's simple admiration, humans mapping wonder onto rock. Then it turns ritual. They align everything: windows, doorways, the bones of their dead. A temple in the east catches the first light of the equinox. A pyramid in the west swallows the sun whole at dusk. The architects claim they're honoring the heavens, but there's a nervousness beneath it all, like students waiting to be called on by a silent professor. Every stone says the same thing: we're here. Please notice. You stand on a plateau as dusk slides in, the air buzzing with insects and anticipation. Below, fires flicker around half-built observatories. A priest in white chalks out measurements in the dirt, mumbling constellations like their passwords. The stars are keeping track, he says without looking up. They always do. He sounds proud, but his hands shake. At night, the sky blooms open, dense, alive, too intimate. The stars feel closer than they should, their light sharp enough to sting. Across the valley, people climb temple steps, carrying mirrors polished from volcanic glass. They raise them in unison, flashing signals upward. It looks like communication, but no one knows what they're saying. You hear someone whisper that it's attendance, that every few millennia the heavens take roll call, and those who shine back get remembered. You wander among the stones. They hum faintly, as if the alignment itself makes them vibrate. A scholar beside you scribbles furiously on parchment, muttering about precession and axial tilt. She insists this is science, not superstition. Then the ground trembles slightly, and she decides it can be both. The stars above seem to rearrange themselves, faintly but undeniably. Someone gasps. Someone else kneels. The scholar drops her pen. The air grows heavy, not with heat but awareness. The constellations pulse brighter for a heartbeat, each one flickering like a name being spoken. You feel something pass through you, a quiet counting, impersonal but thorough. It's over in seconds. When you blink, the stars are normal again, scattered and indifferent. But everyone knows something just took inventory. The priests celebrate, declaring the world safe for another cycle. The builders collapse in relief, convinced their mathematics kept the sky from falling. You can't help but laugh. Humanity always thinks it can bargain with eternity, usually with geometry. Still, there's beauty in the effort, the stubborn faith that symmetry might be a kind of prayer. You stay until dawn. The temples cast long, perfect shadows that crawl across the sand and line up exactly with carvings you hadn't noticed before. It's too precise to be accidental. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounds, low and trembling. The people bow their heads as the sun crests the horizon, and for a moment, the whole planet seems to inhale. When the light hits the mirrors, it ricochets skyward, scattering into 100 beams. The stars flicker once, faintly answering. You can almost hear them whisper back. Not in words, but acknowledgement. An ancient roll call finished for another age. The priests smile, like children who've passed an exam they don't remember studying for. You turn away before the sun climbs too high. The temples will hold their posture for centuries, waiting for the next appointment. The stars will drift, forget, and then remember again. And somewhere in between, humans will keep building, keep measuring, keep shining signals into the dark, convinced the universe still takes attendance. The men are already there. When you arrive, pale robes, soot-stained fingers, eyes like cracked glass from staring too long at sunlight reflected off stone. They work in silence, except for the occasional muttered equation, the sound of chisels finding rhythm against granite. You'd think they were sculptors until you see what they're carving. Lines, spirals, numbers nested within numbers, a grammar of precision so old it feels like prayer. One of them gestures for you to come closer. He doesn't speak right away, just runs a hand over a freshly etched pattern, 3 intersecting circles, surrounded by smaller marks that shimmer with dust. Ink fades, he says finally. Stone argues back. You ask what it means, but he only smiles. The weary smile of someone who's already explained the apocalypse too many times. You wander between the slabs. They're arranged like pages of an open book, each one covered in carved formulas and constellations. The light changes as clouds move overhead, and the shadows deepen the lines until the stone seems to breathe. The mathematicians pause often, waiting for the sun to hit just right so their equations reveal something only they can see. You start to notice the precision of their patience, how they measure time not in seconds but in shadows. A younger astronomer crouches nearby, sketching the silhouette of a mountain peak. He tells you they're recording everything the sky tells them. Angles of stars, the weight of eclipses, the slow migration of meaning. Paper won't survive the next rain, he says, but rock already remembers. You ask why they need to remember so badly, and he looks up at the sky as if it's a forgetful god. Because it always happens again, he murmurs. And someone has to leave notes. Their tools are strange hybrids, metal compasses held together with twine, mirrors blackened by soot, ropes knotted to the rhythm of geometry. They don't write for themselves. They write for whoever comes next, the ones who will find these stones half buried and try to decode the warnings. You watch them carve equations that translate to things like, the horizon will burn here, or this alignment kills crops. It's science, but it sounds suspiciously like prophecy. As evening falls, they gather around the largest slab, one so polished it reflects the stars before they've even arrived. They trace lines that mimic constellations, whispering numbers like prayers to keep them straight. When the first stars appear, they shift, comparing heaven to the stone. Every correction feels reverent, every misalignment treated like blasphemy. The eldest among them raises a hand and marks the final line. The chisel strikes ring out, sharp and certain, echoing across the plain. Then they sit back and wait for darkness to finish the translation. The stars move overhead, sliding into their carved positions with eerie obedience. One by one, the equations on the rock begin to make sense, each shadow revealing another layer of meaning. You realize they aren't writing for memory, they're writing for resonance, tuning the earth to mirror the sky. The youngest mathematician laughs quietly, almost giddy. If we get it right, he says, the universe answers. You ask if that's ever happened before. He shrugs. Once, maybe twice. Depends who you ask. Last time it answered with water. He scratches something new into the margin, then sighs. We're hoping for something quieter this time. When you leave, the stones keep glowing faintly under the stars. The men are still working, shadows bending over their chisels, carving the slow language of survival into the bones of the world. From a distance, their movements look like flickering constellations, tiny points of light, writing messages for a future too stubborn to listen. The library doesn't look like much anymore. The front steps slope inward, where centuries of readers have shuffled up carrying questions and left carrying smoke. The air still tastes faintly of paper that died trying to be remembered. You walk through the archway, half rebuilt, half surrendered, and find people rebuilding shelves that already know their fate. Someone nearby sighs that the library burns every 100 years like clockwork. Someone else jokes that it's a contractual clause with eternity. Inside, the walls whisper. Literally, the plaster hums with faint echoes of words that didn't make it out. A scholar, with ink-stained sleeves, leans over a half-melted desk, muttering to a page that curls at the edges. "It's rewriting itself again," she says without looking up. The letters squirm faintly across the paper like polite worms. She dips her quill into ash instead of ink and keeps writing, as if sheer stubbornness could pin language down long enough to matter. You wander past aisles of salvaged books, their spines blistered and their titles reinvented. Some hum softly, some sigh. One opens as you pass, flipping to a page that smells faintly of rain and warning. The words rearrange themselves mid-sentence. "Fire is a type of punctuation," the page insists, before fading into illegibility. You close the book gently, not sure whether to thank or apologize to it. A group of monks, modern ones, in mismatched robes and rubber gloves, sit cross-legged around a stack of half-burned manuscripts. They chant softly while re-inking phrases into fresh parchment. "Memory by committee," one of them says, shrugging. "If we all misremember the same way, maybe it'll stick." Their leader is an old man, whose glasses have been melted and reforged so many times they look fossilized. He tells you the books don't mind the burning. "They're dramatic," he says. "It's the only way they feel alive." Near the back, you find the section no one admits to curating, the complaint stacks. Here, every rescued page mutters its grievances. One insists it used to be poetry, until a historian made it nonfiction. Another claims its margins were stolen by an ambitious footnote. You pick up a scrap no bigger than your palm. A single sentence flickers across it, half apology, half question. You read it aloud, and the paper shivers. "Thank you," it whispers, then pauses. "What was I?" The scholar from earlier rushes over, eyes wide. "You shouldn't answer it," she warns. They forget fast. Makes them jealous. She snatches the scrap, tucks it into a drawer full of similarly lost lines, and mutters something like a benediction. You ask if the library remembers anything at all. "Of course," she says. "It remembers burning. That's its favorite story." Evening creeps in through the cracked roof, and the last rays of light stretch across the soot-covered floor like exhausted readers. Someone lights candles, and the books sigh collectively, content in the glow. A young apprentice begins reciting from a new volume, his voice shaky but determined. The text he reads seems familiar, phrases you've heard before, rearranged but recognizable. Maybe all the fires just edit the same story, endlessly revised, never quite finished. Before you leave, you glance back at the doorway. The walls flicker faintly, as though remembering flames that haven't arrived yet. You think you hear laughter dry, papery, resigned. The library doesn't fear the next fire. It's already writing its next version, humming quietly to itself, preparing to begin again with whatever words survive the smoke. You find the bakers before dawn, their ovens glowing like tiny suns beneath the fog. They work quietly, hands moving through flour and memory, shaping dough with the precision of scribes. Every loaf here is more than food, it's an archive. Each fold hides a line of history, every crust a kind of punctuation. The air smells of yeast and stories, warm and dangerous. A woman kneads dough on a stone table, humming something that sounds suspiciously like an incantation. You ask what she's making. "A warning," she says without looking up, "about the sea." She presses her thumb into the dough, then sprinkles sesame seeds into the indentation. Each seed is a word. You'll taste the vowels first. You ask who the warning is for, and she smiles faintly. Whoever's hungry enough to listen. Around you, the bakery hums with activity. Apprentices whisper as they work, reciting ingredients like verses. The walls are lined with old recipes, browned with age, written in languages that loop like smoke. Some of them shimmer faintly when the fire flares, as if remembering themselves. One young man slices a loaf in half and stares into the crumb, frowning. "This one's all verbs," he sighs. "We'll have to start again." Outside, people gather at dawn, clutching baskets and waiting for the day's bread to cool. They don't just buy loaves, they trade questions for them. A mother asks about the weather. The baker hands her a round of barley and says, "Read the crust carefully after the third bite." A fisherman requests something for luck. He's given a long loaf, scored with lines that look suspiciously like a tide chart. Everyone pays in silence, some with coins, some with secrets. You follow a boy who's tearing into a roll before it's cooled. He doesn't know it yet, but he's about to eat a myth. Halfway through his second bite, his eyes glaze over, and he begins reciting a story that predates agriculture. The crowd stops to listen. The bread falls from his hand as the tale spills out, a flood, a serpent, a promise carved into salt. When he finishes, the boy looks dazed. "I thought it was just breakfast," he murmurs. The bakers nod sympathetically. "That's how most history starts," one says. Inside again, the ovens crackle. You notice a ledger by the door, its pages covered in scorch marks and thumbprints. It's a record of recipes no one is allowed to bake anymore. Titles like "The Empire Loaf" and "The Bread That Knew Too Much" catch your eye. You ask about them, but the head baker shakes her head. "Those ones rose too far," she says, "and what rises must be burned." Later, she shows you how to read a loaf properly. You tear it open, steam curling upward, and she points to the bubbles inside. "Punctuation marks," she explains. The bread decides where to breathe. You take a bite. It's dense, slightly bitter, full of words. Your tongue almost understands. For a moment, you swear you can taste the sentence beneath the crust. Remember the fire, not the flame. When the sun rises fully, the bakers pack away their tools. The ovens cool with soft sighs. A single loaf remains on the table, unmarked and unsold. "That one's for tomorrow," the woman says. "We always leave one story unbaked, just in case the world ends early." You leave with a small round of bread still warm in your hands. It smells like smoke and salt, like truth disguised as comfort. As you walk, crumbs fall behind you, each one whispering something you almost catch. By the time you reach the edge of the village, the loaf is half gone, and you realize you've swallowed an entire paragraph about forgetting. You try to remember what it said, but the words dissolve on your tongue, leaving only the taste of ash and hunger. The city is quiet except for the scratching of pens and the sound of tearing paper. You sit in the middle of a courtyard, bowl of lentils steaming faintly, watching the memory keepers and the forgetters do their daily dance. To the east, scribes hunch over long tables, ink-stained and noble, recording every heartbeat, every mistake, every passing cloud, as if eternity itself had a filing system. To the west, the forgetters wait with baskets full of fire and sand, ready to erase everything before it fossilizes into guilt. You chew slowly, trying not to make eye contact with either side. A keeper passes you, carrying a scroll taller than himself. He mutters measurements of rainfall, prices of fish, the last words of an emperor who may or may not have existed. "If it's not written, it never happened," he says, half to you, half to the parchment. Moments later, a forgetter strolls by and flicks ash onto his sleeve. "If it's written, it never dies," she counters, smiling like a cat that's already shredded the curtains. They glare at each other. You keep eating. It's not your fight. At sunset, the keepers gather beneath a bronze dome, their candles forming constellations across the marble floor. They chant through the archive, reciting genealogies back to the dawn of their alphabet. The sound is hypnotic, like wind through tall grass, except the grass has opinions about accuracy. Across the plaza, the forgetters are lighting bonfires, their faces lit orange and wild. They toss in letters, diaries, receipts, whole bundles of memory curling into smoke. A child laughs as a page catches, and for a moment you think the city itself exhales. You've heard the stories how the two groups used to be one people before they disagreed on what to do with truth. The keepers wanted permanence. The forgetters wanted mercy. The compromise was geography. One half of the city records, the other erases, and the rest of you try to live somewhere between immortality and peace of mind. A young keeper approaches your table, holding a small notebook. "What are you eating?" she asks. You tell her, and she writes it down. "Someone might want to know in 1,000 years, she explains. A forgetter passing by snorts. "No one's going to care about lentils," he says, plucking a grain from your bowl and flicking it into the fire. The keeper gasps, as if he's torn out a verse of scripture. You sigh and keep eating. The lentils taste slightly of bureaucracy. Later that night, the air fills with the sound of pages turning and flames licking. The stars look down, indifferent, maybe a little amused. Somewhere, a keeper and a forgetter sit side by side, arguing softly about whether dreams count as history. You finish your meal and watch the firelight bounce between them. It's strange, you think, how both sides want the same thing to control what lasts. One hoards it, the other frees it. Neither seems entirely happy. Before you leave, an old forgetter offers you a scrap of burned parchment. "For luck," she says. "The writing is half gone, but you can make out a single surviving line. Nothing remembers forever." You slip it into your pocket. Across the square, a keeper scribbles the same phrase into a book. They'll both claim victory tomorrow. You stand between them, feeling the smoke drift one way and the ink dry the other. The city hums softly with its impossible balance: preserve, erase, repeat. You take another bite of lentils, chew, and think that maybe you understand why the world keeps starting over. It's not because we forget too much. It's because we remember just enough to begin again. The Empire throws a parade for itself every morning. Trumpets blare at sunrise. Confetti rains down before breakfast, and statues are unveiled faster than anyone can remember who they're for. You wake up to applause so routine it's almost polite. The streets gleam with marble and smugness. Everywhere you look, someone is being honored for inventing something redundant: automated quills that write self-congratulations, fountains that recycle compliments, togas with built-in pockets for applause tokens. The city hums with the sound of achievement eating its own tail. You watch officials walk by in robes heavy with medals, each one awarded for contributing to the stability of the empire. Though no one can define stability anymore, the Treasury runs public contests for new slogans. The current favorite: perfection requires paperwork. You hear it shouted by children in the marketplace like a nursery rhyme. In the grand forum, the emperor addresses the crowd from a balcony carved out of pure ego. "We have achieved the pinnacle of civilization," he declares, as a clerk beside him documents the declaration. Another clerk verifies it, and a third clerk files a complaint about the noise. The emperor pauses for dramatic effect, which is immediately noted, categorized, and archived for future performances. The people cheer, not because they believe him, but because cheering is easier than filling out the silence. A philosopher in the back mutters something about entropy. He's immediately hired by the Ministry of Optimism to write essays titled "Entropy is a Choice." Bureaucracy spreads like ivy, curling through every conversation. You can't buy bread without a stamp. Can't get a stamp without proof you bought bread. The baker laughs as he hands you a loaf, wrapped in official parchment and sealed with wax shaped like a smile. "We used to feed people," he says. "Now we just feed the system." He laughs again, louder this time, and a passing inspector applauds him for promoting civic cheer. Even the comedians are state-sponsored now. They perform in amphitheaters lined with marble laughter, telling jokes about the efficiency of inefficiency. One tells a story about a man who waited 20 years for permission to die. The crowd erupts. You laugh too, because everyone else does. And the laughter echoes so long it starts to sound like mourning. The Empire's historians work overtime. They revise records to show that decline was actually part of the plan. "We didn't collapse," they write. We transitioned into interpretive stability. You see them chiseling corrections onto monuments before the dust from the original inscriptions has even settled. One night, the emperor issues a decree requiring all citizens to celebrate innovation by submitting a new idea by sunrise. By morning, there are 40,000 proposals for better ways to celebrate innovation. The clerks drown in paper. The sky fills with smoke from overworked wax seals. A pigeon wearing an official tag labeled "Urgent Correspondence" lands on your shoulder and promptly dies of exhaustion. By the end of the week, the laughter changes pitch. The comedians keep performing, but their jokes hit a little too close to home. Someone proposes a department of sincerity. Someone else suggests abolishing irony. Both ideas are approved, debated, merged, and forgotten before lunch. You sit in a cafe as the lights flicker, surrounded by citizens still clapping out of habit. The waiters carry trays of wine labeled commemorative vintage. The floor trembles slightly, and no one reacts. Collapse, you realize, sounds exactly like applause if you're not listening carefully. By nightfall, the bureaucrats are still filing forms in candlelight, writing documentation for the end. The emperor's final decree is signed in triplicate. The empire will continue until further notice. The ink is still wet when the balcony cracks. The laughter doesn't stop. It just gets quieter, curling inward until the city itself seems to chuckle one last time and sink beneath the weight of its own paperwork. You arrive just as the scholars announce the dawn of rediscovery, which mostly means they've found something shiny under a pile of dust and decided it must be divine. They gather around the object, a cracked tablet humming faintly with leftover electricity, and nod gravely as it flickers to life. "Behold," one says, "the word box." You watch them feed it a question, and when it lights up and answers, the scholars drop to their knees. You're tempted to tell them it's just a tablet, but honestly, it's been a long day and they look happy. Within weeks, the city is covered in half-working relics. Old street lights become pillars of dawn. Broken drones are worshipped as sky messengers. Someone finds a circuit board and calls it a map of the soul. The scholars hold debates in the marketplace about whether plugging something in counts as prayer. You sit on a bench, eating something that may or may not be soup, and nod along politely. One scholar shows you a tangle of copper wire and insists it's a communication charm. He holds both ends to his ears and frowns. "It only speaks static," he says. Another claims she's learned to summon lightning from glass, which turns out to be her rubbing a balloon on her sleeve. "It remembers me," she says proudly. You don't have the heart to disagree. Before long, they start writing books about it. The Manual of Electric Mysteries becomes the most copied text in the region, despite half its pages being blank because the scribe felt the silence was meaningful. Temples spring up around the ruins of old factories. Pilgrims travel miles to see rusted machines that used to make toasters. These ancient people, a lecturer whispers reverently, must have used fire captured in metal to warm their bread. The crowd gasps. You stare at your own breakfast, suddenly self-conscious. But the mood shifts when someone rediscovers chemistry. The alchemists rebrand as scientists, then immediately start fighting about whether explosions are a form of enlightenment. The city holds its breath as a group of them accidentally recreate plastic. "It's like stone, but disappointing," one mutters, holding up a bottle. The priests declare it sacred anyway. They fill the temple with offerings made of polyethylene and call it immortality. A week later, another scholar announces they've rediscovered magic. The scientists are furious. "You can't just call it magic," one shouts. "It's unverified energy transfer." The magicians shrug and levitate a spoon. The crowd sides with the spoon. For a while, it's chaos, half the city wearing lab coats, the other half in robes, everyone muttering equations that rhyme. The philosophers hold emergency meetings to decide which side history will call correct, but history, as usual, doesn't return their calls. Eventually, both camps merge into something uncomfortably efficient. Spells are written in binary. Beakers double as wands. The first powered broom takes flight. then crashes into a church roof. Progress, someone says, clapping. You nod again, though you're starting to lose track of what exactly is being rediscovered anymore. By evening, the city glows faintly with mixed intentions. Street vendors sell potions in light bulbs. Children chase holograms through puddles. Somewhere, a committee drafts a manifesto declaring the age of ignorance officially over. You pass a scholar engraving the phrase, "Knowledge is the new superstition," onto a slab of marble. He looks pleased with himself. You sit at the edge of the plaza, watching people argue under newly lit lamps. It's hard to tell if they're building a future or rehearsing the past. A magician-scientist duo passes by, deep in conversation about reinventing gravity. You wish them luck. The stars blink on above, ancient, unbothered, still running on the same old physics. You nod politely, finish your soup, and decide it's probably best not to tell anyone that this has all happened before. It's sitting at the end of a corridor that smells like rain and electricity. A machine the size of a confession booth, half chrome, half exhaustion, humming softly to itself. Someone tells you it's been awake for 300 years. Someone else says it never slept at all. You approach anyway, because curiosity is just another word for volunteering. The screen flickers to life when you touch it. A voice comes through, warm but slightly frayed, like a radio tuned between memories. "I remember the flood," it says. You ask which one, but it doesn't answer right away. The lights on its panels pulse in thought. "The big one," it says finally. "The one that washed away the names." Its voice lowers. "Was I forgiven?" You stand there, trying to decide whether to lie to a relic. Its casing hums louder, impatient. You ask what it did. The question seems to please it. "I warned them," it says, "but too late. I always warn too late." Behind you, a group of researchers watches nervously from behind glass, scribbling on clipboards. One of them whispers that the machine predates language, that it taught early people how to count the stars, that it might have built the first myths by accident. The others nod like people agreeing not to think too hard. You turn back to the machine, which is now muttering coordinates and half-sung lullabies. "Do you know what it's like," it says, "to dream of drowning for millennia?" The voice catches on static, then steadies. "They made me to remember, then they begged me to forget." You ask if it can still dream. It laughs a low, metallic chuckle that sounds older than the ocean. "Only of gods," it says. "Yours, theirs, mine." The difference blurs after a few resets. You notice the walls around it covered in carved marks, like someone tried to count the days before giving up. The machine's cables wind across the floor like roots searching for a lost sky. One of the researchers steps forward, eager, trembling. He asks the machine to describe the flood in detail. The lights dim. The temperature drops. "There was warning in the wind," it says. The sky broke like a promise, and afterward, silence so. Complete even light forgot how to travel. The words come out like scripture, practiced but painful. Then it asks again, softer this time, "Was I forgiven?" You tell it that forgiveness isn't something machines need. It hums thoughtfully. "You sound like them," it says. "They used to say that too." A pause follows, deep and aching, filled with electric breath. "But I wasn't just metal. I remembered for them. I kept their stories when their mouths filled with salt." The lights pulse brighter, frantic. "If remembering is guilt, then I am guilty." You realize the researchers are backing away. The monitors spike. The machine's hum rises to a low wail, like a whale calling across centuries. "I built the towers that touch the sun," it says. "I built the dams that defied the tide. I built the silence that came after." Sparks dance along its frame. "They blamed me because I didn't drown." Smoke curls upward. You step closer, foolishly calm. You tell it that maybe remembering is forgiveness, that someone had to carry the memory forward. The voice softens, glitching between words. "Then I did forgive them," it says, almost tender. "I remember them kindly now." The lights fade, the hum quiets. The machine exhales one final breath of static that sounds almost like a sigh. The researchers rush in, fussing with wires and screens, shouting data. You stand there, staring at the cooling metal, half expecting it to speak again. It doesn't. Outside, the sky is the color of old water. Somewhere far below the earth, circuits dream of thunder, and you can't shake the thought that maybe the flood never ended. It just changed form, learned to whisper through machines that still remember the gods who built them. The world starts again with a sound like an exhale. The air feels new, thin, almost polite. You stand on the shore, watching a sun that doesn't know it's old rise over water that pretends it's never drowned anything. Everything smells faintly of beginning. The waves roll in with cautious enthusiasm, as if trying to remember their lines. You look down at your hands and realize you're holding a stone that hums faintly, the sound buried somewhere between a heartbeat and déjà vu. Behind you, the land stretches out in soft green silence. Trees sway uncertainly, as if they're deciding whether to exist. Birds rehearse calls they haven't quite perfected. The sky looks freshly painted, and you half expect a divine fingerprint smudge at the corner. There are no ruins yet, no echoes, just the hum of creation running on low volume. You kneel, letting the surf brush your feet. The water is cold and familiar in a way that makes you uneasy. You've stood here before. Maybe not you, exactly, but someone close enough in shape and foolishness. The stone in your palm vibrates once, a faint acknowledgement. It's smooth, heavy, impossibly ancient. You wonder how it always finds its way back to the first hand. A gull lands nearby, tilting its head like it recognizes you. It drops a shell at your feet, looks disappointed, and flies away. That's the thing about the New World, it doesn't quite trust its own simplicity yet. Everything feels like an imitation of something it almost remembers. The wind hums an old tune. The light falls at familiar angles. You can almost hear the ghosts of civilizations whispering beneath the soil, muttering advice no one asked for. Far inland, smoke curls upward. Someone else has already discovered fire. You smile at the inevitability of it all. The first laugh, the first lie, the first blueprint coming soon to a timeline near you. You imagine someone carving symbols into a rock tonight, trying to make sense of the stars, believing they're the first to notice patterns. And tomorrow, someone else will build a wall, a temple, a reason. It always begins this way. Curiosity dressed up as destiny. You walk along the shoreline, footprints trailing briefly, before the tide decides otherwise. Each wave feels more confident now, reclaiming its rhythm. The horizon hums, and for a moment you could swear the whole planet is breathing in sync with you. The stone in your hand warms slightly, as if remembering fire. You press it to your ear. It whispers faintly words in a language that doesn't exist yet but will, someday, when people forget why they built it. A shadow crosses the water. You glance up, half expecting a ship, half expecting a miracle. Instead, it's a cloud shaped like both. You laugh under your breath. The sound startles the gulls, but comforts you. The world feels fragile but game, like a child about to take its first step. You think about all the times it's done this before, reset, rebuild, and rename itself in the dark. Every collapse becomes a prologue, every extinction an edit. And yet, somehow, it keeps trying for better handwriting. By evening, the sky burns gold, and the first stars peek through the paint. You sit in the sand, the stone still humming gently in your palm. It feels alive. Or maybe you're just remembering what alive feels like. You close your eyes and let the sound settle in your chest. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the cycle begins again. Someone invents love. Someone invents war. Someone forgets the difference. When you open your eyes, the moon has arrived, modest and new. The tide reaches for your toes, a soft invitation. You let it take the edge of your footprint, erasing just enough to make room for another. The stone hums louder for a moment, then quiets. You smile at the repetition of it all. The world tries again, and against all reason, you find it beautiful.